Um,
Wow.
uh, After that, somebody invented the World Wide Web, and I got sucked into developing cloud infrastructure and all sorts of things like that. But about 2 years ago, I started the project to develop the OWASP top 10 for large language models. When I started that, I thought maybe I'd find 10 people in the world who were interested in this obscure
Hmm.
corner of the intersection
Hmm.
of AI and cybersecurity. When I announced it, I had 200 people sign up for the expert group in the first day, and it's
Wow.
just grown since then. We have about
Yeah, yeah,
1,000 people who are attached to
yeah,
the project one way or another now. So,
yeah, yeah.
and then I've been at Exabeam for about the last year and a half, and Exabeam is a company that has been doing AI to analyze cybersecurity data for 10 years. And, since I've joined, we've embedded large language models into the system. We're combining traditional ML and LLMs to do analysis and agentic workflows. And so it's been fabulous to kind of look at this in all different ways. Like, how are the bad guys using AI? How can we help the good guys use AI and
Mhm.
help everybody understand the security implications of this new technology?
And could you a little bit tell about what triggered your, why start this group? What triggered it? Any incident, event, or you thought, hey, this is big, let's start it? 2 years back
So,
when nobody was talking. Yeah.
yeah, so 2023, we were getting ready for RSA,
Uh-huh.
interestingly enough, which is coming up
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the
The
next
week.
few days.
Yeah.
And um, we were trying to decide what we were going to say about AI at RSA. And if you
Hmm.
remember
Hmm.
back to 2023, this was
Yeah.
4 months after ChatGPT had launched. Almost none of us knew what to
Yeah.
say. And so I
Right.
started doing research just on AI and cybersecurity. And a friend sent me an article on data poisoning. It was
Hmm.
just very like, hey, here's a unique thing about AI that's a vulnerability that doesn't exist elsewhere. And
Hmm.
as I started to research these things, I realized there was no comprehensive documentation anywhere on how to think
Cool.
about the vulnerabilities in AI.
Yeah.
So honestly, I had a long conversation with ChatGPT over a weekend,
Uh-huh.
and I came out with a first draft of the top 10 list. I don't even really
Okay.
know the first draft, but it was a thing.
Uh,
And
mm.
I sent it to some friends, and they said, "Look,
Uh,
this is really interesting," and we put
um,
together an expert group to really pursue it, and built something that was peer reviewed and really well received.
Great. Fantastic. So could you touch on your book a little bit, how the book started and
Sure.
a little bit, yeah, I'd love to hear that story as well.
Yeah, so the book's from O'Reilly. It's called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security. And a few months after we started the OWASP project and it was starting to garner a lot of attention, I had an editor from O'Reilly just reach out and ask if I wanted to write a book. And
Mhm.
I'd written one other book when I was much younger, when I was a member of the Java team at Sun Microsystems. I wrote a book
Okay.
about how to write high performance Java programs.
Yeah.
I remember at the time going, that was way too much work. I'm never doing that again.
Mm.
But it was 25 years later and I'd kind of forgotten. So I thought,
Okay.
I'll bang this out in a few months. It'll be great. It took about a year.
Uh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
but what I really liked is I got to take everything that we learned building the first versions of the
Yeah.
OWASP materials. I get to spend a lot more time going through in-depth case studies, rather than
Mm.
hey, here's 5 things that can go wrong, and here's a link to a news article about it.
Mm.
Got to really tear apart some of these case studies and
Go a
go,
little
what
deeper.
happened?
Yeah.
This is what happened. This
Yeah.
is why this went wrong. And then
Yeah.
the other thing about it is the book's broken into 3 sections, one of which gives you kind of the foundations for how do you think about modeling LLM applications and what are the
Mm.
trust boundaries. Um, the second part is a lot about what are the different vulnerabilities in the areas you have to worry about. But the last part really, we didn't have it all before, which is how do you build a framework for how do you build secure apps when you're putting
Yeah.
in the environment, and what do you need
Yeah.
to do to your your DevOps pipelines and how do I need to think about how I change testing? What's an AI red team and why do I need one?
Yeah.
And really kind of get into it from that
The basic
perspective.
framework, how to some big blocks to think for the companies, right? Because
Yep,
even we don't have that basic blocks now, inside companies. Makes
exactly.
sense. Yeah. So that's another connection, Steve. I was at Sun Microsystems during those days. I was on, .com days. It was an exciting time to develop Java back then.
For sure.
Um, so I'll go to the next topic, which is the bulk of what we want to discuss. Uh, from a complexity point of view, right? People understand this is complex. Why do you think it's complex? We had been building applications, traditional applications. It's not new. Threats are new or not new, right? So what makes it harder in AI, right? I'll tell a couple of our customer stories as you go along, but love to hear your thoughts. What makes it complex? So that the people, listeners can understand, oh, I didn't think about this. Oh, this is the reason why it's complex.
Yeah. Well, first, let's start with one of the sad facts of, call it application security, which is the
Yeah.
first OWASP top 10 list, that we now think of as being for web apps came out 25 years ago.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the first thing on the list was SQL injection.
Yeah.
Not like that problem went away.
Yeah.
It's still
Yeah.
there. Everybody knows
This is
about it.
there.
We're
Yeah.
moderately better at defending against it, but like
Hmm.
when you build one of these new applications, first off, you don't get to forget everything that you had to learn about how to build secure apps in a web
Yeah.
environment and secure APIs and all those other things. So all that's a baseline of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens is somewhat counterintuitive. Is we think of one of the reasons it's hard to keep secure software is that software is so dumb, right? It's
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
doesn't have any self-awareness, and so
All
these
right.
really rudimentary tricks of, uh, injecting something into a log or something like that, you
Right.
have to defend against them very, very meticulously.
Yeah.
The thing that happens as you add AI to the mix is you get something that feels more like a human. They're not as
Hmm.
smart as humans yet, but
Hmm.
the thing that we all know to be true is when you ask a CISO what's the most dangerous entity on their network, it's their own employees,
Yeah. All
right?
right.
It's
Humans.
CISOs are not
Yeah.
worried about, at least not nearly so much about the 0-day vulnerabilities in their code and this and that and the other thing, although that's part of their program. They're worried about these basic things like phishing.
Mm.
When we talk about things like prompt injection, which is at the
Mm.
top of our list, which is actually very different from SQL injection. And
Right.
one of the reasons is prompt injection, in terms of how you defend against it, is more like
Mm.
defending against phishing than it is
Right.
injection.
Then a SQL injection. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's so
And
true.
so what it is you kind of have to reset all your expectations to it's like defending naive users, and it's like you gave a bunch of entities on your network that have the judgment of a 3-year-old the keys to the kingdom in terms of what data they have
Right.
access to,
Right.
and you've got a whole different problem.
Right, right. That's definitely the unpredictability or the intelligence is one. So I recently we are working with a large bank and they're trying Protecto and they're going to protection now. One of the reasons they came to us is they did a smart thing. They gave an OpenAI key to their employees and said, type, right? Whatever you want to use it for. Then they looked at the logs on OpenAI side. Then they thought, oh man, people are putting, call transcripts, credit card numbers. Everything is going there. That takes to this number two risk, which is the sensitive data leak. And they were so worried. They said, man, this is something we have to protect, but if you cannot say stop using, AI is here, right? So that's reason they said, hey, let's use Protecto to identify what is sensitive and tokenize it so that at least we are not leaking PI data to LLMs or any other AI applications. OpenAI, they had visibility. They didn't even know what other models they're using, right? So that increases the risk. So this whole idea of one is this complexity of intelligence acting like a human, and they have interpreting the data, they are taking the data at real time. Then comes the unpredictability, right? So earlier I wrote an application, I exactly know how it behaves, right? I click 1,000 times exactly the work the way it does. In LLMs based applications, AI applications, you never know, right? So because that's what their feature is. One of the feature is that whole unpredictability, surprising you. It's good, do the intelligent things, right? So that makes it very unpredictable, and that's one of the big things people are struggling to wrap their heads around, to make sure that how to protect this new uh, more AI applications, which are not that predictable, right?
Yeah.
That's yeah,
I think it's one of the things that we see is it's not just the small team building their first AI app that's being
right,
caught out by these vulnerabilities.
right,
People who should know better. And
right,
we look at these big vulnerabilities that get disclosed from Microsoft in Copilot or
right.
from
Yeah,
Salesforce in Slack.
absolutely. Yeah,
And they are falling vulnerable to the number one thing on the list, which is prompt injection. And
right, right.
the problem is they haven't really internalized a model of how this works. They're thinking,
Mm,
well, that's prompt injections for chatbots, and somebody tries to trick the chatbot. But if
right.
you're going to have your Copilot read all of a user's email,
Hmm, hmm.
the way that somebody's going to send you a prompt injection is by sending an email to your bot in your mailbox and having
Yeah,
it then use that
process it.
to exfiltrate the contents of your OneDrive or something. And
Right, right.
I think
So
the other really interesting example is Apple with Apple Intelligence, and they've been so much in the news because they've failed to ship a bunch of the functionality they promised.
uh,
But I think it was obvious to everybody in AI security that they were going to fail with this when they announced it
mm,
because
yeah.
they announced all the wrong security guards. They said,
Hmm.
run the LLM on the device so it's going to be safe. And I'm like, that protects you from very little of the problem. I'm going to run the
Right.
LLM in a hardened data center with a lot of encryption. Like that doesn't solve
Yeah.
any of your
Yeah,
problem.
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So the surprisingly even smart, like some of the really smart CIOs, CISOs we meet in the space give that answer to us like, hey, oh, we are self-hosting our LLM, so we don't have risk. No, the risk is the users interacting with it, not just the LLM. LLM is stateless, it's fine, what the application is built around it, what data they are processing, the context data they're storing, how they're responding to, and who's getting the data at the end of the day, right? In the data and insights. That's where the risk is. So in terms of the risk, the overall risk, you would put it like in the top 10 based on customer conversations, right? We talked about prompt injection, data leak. How would you give a framework, or how should CISOs or app security think about these different risks, or equally same, or I'll go in a different order, or different people attack the problem differently? How would you think about this
Yeah.
uh, set of risks?
What I'll say is one of the things that helps a lot is to go back to basics. And
Mhm,
um, when people do realize that like, oh, this AI stuff's very new, they start to worry about the new threats
mhm,
and they ignore the basic pieces about what you know. And a really good example of this is they actually start to think incorrectly about who they need to worry about getting a hold of their data. And
mhm.
this example of I'm going to self-host my LLM being the
Yeah.
answer to everything is a result of like one of the first security headlines to hit when ChatGPT came out was reported everywhere, which is somebody at Samsung uploaded some chip designs to ChatGPT
Mm,
and it
mm.
got into the training base and it became available to the
Yeah.
world. And everyone will tell you that story. I will tell
Right.
you, I have looked for the source of that story. I think
Mm.
it's completely made up.
Oh,
Um,
really? Yeah.
I
Yeah,
find
I
no
never tried that.
evidence that that's true.
Ah,
It's counterintuitive that any of it's
right,
true because,
right.
one exposure to this through it doesn't. it doesn't parse. That's not how these
Right.
things work. But I
Yeah,
think
right. Yeah, to
everybody
be
started
trained on
to,
large volume of data, right? Makes
right?
sense.
So,
Yeah.
so people have started to view the adversary
Yeah.
as the model provider. I'm
Mm,
afraid of leaking my data to ChatGPT because of what
right.
they do with it.
Right.
I think really you need to treat these AI providers like other SaaS providers. And so you do
Mm,
need to look at what are their data retention policies, all of these other things. And look, you probably already are giving all of your data to a cloud
right.
provider that you're trusting with,
Right.
whether it be all of your sales records or all of your files, and you've developed processes around that. So you need to think about that with your AI providers. Uh,
Mm,
but what you need to think about with things like sensitive data disclosure is the
right.
actual potential adversaries. And
Right.
what that leads you to is when you are, say giving data to your own bot, and this could be, I've got an instance of Llama hosted in my data center or a private VM, but if I'm giving that model
Mm,
access to a database in an
right.
unfettered way, then you're
Right.
setting yourself up for somebody to be able to come in and exfiltrate data from it. And it's a completely different problem, and people are not thinking about it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense, Steve. So what we also see is there is a maturity curve kind of a thing, right? So first instinct is, hey, LLM is the risk, right? Then they think about it. It's not just the LLM. LLM can be, trusted in some cases because they are hosted by some Microsoft or Google. They have strong policies. Then they have to think about the users interacting with it, can be internal, external. I'll give an example. One of our customers, they were building a bot to review contracts, right? They want to review contracts. So they uploaded all the historical contracts to give a context for the bot. So it had PII, who wrote the contract, to who, everything, and they looked at the logs, what people are searching for. They started searching for, hey, what did that VP write contract on? Who's getting the highest contract? So it's not just your adversarial or, yeah, malicious people. It's just the internal risk is also high, right? The users
Mhm.
who are interacting with. Then another risk we have seen is, um, they are earlier we used to have structured data that is get fed into applications. Now it's unstructured. So the data is an S3 bucket or OneDrive, or it's in my huge folders of files I had, a dump of logs. So they're mixing everything and vectorizing and doing a RAG or an agent. So what happens here is you don't know what data is flowing in. Right. So once it's in the context, now it can leak, right? So LLM doesn't know about your company, so it cannot leak by itself. Once you add the context data into that, now the risk multiplies, right? Now anybody interacting with the AI application can potentially see the data that you have fed as a context, and you're not careful in what context you're giving, then those things can leak. And it's not just PII; other sensitive information can also leak. So this is how I think, one of some of the maturity is also there. People are slowly realizing, yeah, this is how to think about the risk. This is where I think the OWASP is, that top 10 is really good. Think about this and go to the basics. Then let's think about, what data are we using, who has access, right?
You know, one of the most fundamental tenets that I try to give people to change their
Uh-huh.
thinking about this is you need to think about your LLM as at all times something
Mhm.
between a confused deputy and an enemy sleeper agent. And um
Okay.
and the implication here is,
Yeah.
if you give your LLM
Uh,
access to all of your data records because
right.
people might want to ask it about
Yeah.
anything, um, you might have had all of this RBAC wrapped around your database because
Mhm.
the users are only entitled to access certain things.
Mhm.
If you try to have your LLM enforce your RBAC, it's
Mhm.
it's not designed to do that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to think about, use the credentials of the user talking to the LLM and use those credentials to fetch things from the database.
Mhm.
But it
Mhm.
can't tell the user something they couldn't have looked up some other way. And people are not
Mhm.
thinking about it that way. They're thinking about
Mhm.
the naive ways to build this and then thinking that if you put in the system prompt don't give data to people who aren't entitled to it, that's going to be a sufficient patch of defense. And then the other one is when it does come to the self-hosting
Yeah.
question, um, people think about, security people inherently, I think, still want to rack hug various things, right? If it's in my data center,
Yeah. 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 Right. Right.
um, but when you do that, you are opening yourself up to a tremendous amount of supply chain risk that people are not considering. And
Hmm.
I say it all the time.
Mm.
Hugging Face is a security dumpster fire. Uh, it's
Okay.
I mean, GitHub is enough
Yeah.
of a dumpster fire when you look
Fire.
at
Right.
it. There's a whole industry of software composition analysis tools to
Yeah.
keep you safe from what's floating around on GitHub. The software supply chain for AI stuff is so much less mature. And in fact, what
Uh,
people have been downloading is basically unstructured blob of 100 billion floating point values.
mm.
How do you inspect that to know what it's
Yeah.
going to do? Or
What is ingested? What was the
yeah.
supply chain that stores?
So,
So
so
certainly.
the idea that you could even test that for weeks and it does exactly what you want until the bad guy comes along and whispers the password in its ear and
Yeah.
turns
Yeah.
it into
Right.
the Winter Soldier, like in the Marvel movie. It's so
Suddenly turns into something else.
yeah,
Interesting. Yeah. I think we should give that analogy like that confused deputy versus the sleeper cell. That's a good, people like, that's a very interesting thinking, Steve, there, because people like to think in characters. So
yeah,
you should think of a character so that people know they can wrap their head around these risks.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like you know the CISOs out there have gotten good about thinking of
Mm,
their users as always potential insider risks,
mm,
intentional
mm.
or unintentional. And so they
Right.
do try to wrap them in all these things. I'm going to log
Yeah.
their behaviors. I'm going to
Yeah.
look at them.
Yeah.
I'm going to analyze them. I'm going to train them.
Right.
You have to treat these new entities at least that way.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. In terms of, we talked a little bit of Microsoft. We talked about the risk in the in companies. Any other real world example that you would like to share that will be helpful for people to think, hey, I didn't think about this, or this is how somebody solved. I'll also share some of the insights. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Um, I think we've talked about a couple interesting cases.
Yeah,
The prompt injection, indirect prompt injection is the risks are still very real. And the thing to remember is that these risks are not independent. Prompt injection
right.
is an entry vector. It is a
Mm,
vulnerability. It's not actually necessarily a complete attack. So
mm,
you're going to be vulnerable to prompt injection. Just wrapping something around it can reduce that probability, but it
yeah,
probably doesn't reduce it to
right.
zero. So you need to think about the data coming in and the data
Exactly.
coming out, and like what are all of the trust boundaries and what are
Right.
all of the controls that you're going to put around all of them.
Right. Right.
But some things to think about. I always encourage people to expand their thinking a little bit about the risks of these things beyond the strictest, let's call them cybersecurity requirements. Because
Mm,
ultimately, in cybersecurity, we're the only ones who know how to think about risk for our organizations, other than the legal
mm.
department, and you don't want them being in charge of this with this technology. So you can find these real world examples
Right.
of things like hallucinations turn
Mhm.
into very direct risks for your company. And
Right.
there are ones that really do go to cybersecurity risk, which is the more that we use to generate code with these things, the more that we see that the limitations and how they generate code in various ways can lead to insecure code,
Mm,
which can lead to issues. And most notoriously, we've seen these examples for a long time. It will imagine the existence of an open source package that doesn't
mm,
exist.
mm,
Bad guys have researched all the common ones that
mm,
ChatGPT imagines, and they've built
mm.
real versions of them full of
With
nefarious
the
stuff
malice.
and put
Yeah.
them on
Yeah.
GitHub.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but the ones that people think about less
Mm,
are sort of the unreliability of these technologies if you're
correct.
not on top of it.
Right.
There was a good example with Air Canada where they built a chatbot to do
Yes.
customer support, and
Yeah.
it wound up getting confused and gave the customer some bad advice that cost them money.
Yeah.
They got sued. Ultimately,
Mm.
they probably spent more money trying to like litigate this case, and they should have just given the guy his money back.
And that's true.
But now what it's created is legal precedents where
Right.
the judges have had to come out and say in no uncertain terms, you are liable for what your chatbot does the same way
Exactly.
you are for a human agent or misinformation on your website. And so those things definitely factor into it. Um,
Yeah.
the other ones that have very clearly risen to the top all of a sudden
Mm.
are what I'll call some of the more abstract risks from the first version of the list, which are things like excessive agency. Uh,
Mm.
we used the term agency because we could all see where this is going, which is people are
Right.
going to start building agents, even
At
though
the
people
agency.
weren't really building them yet. But people were experimenting with them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's thinking, well, I'll take the output of this and I'll use it to trigger some tools. As
Right.
soon as you give the bot fingers in addition to a mouth, everything gets more interesting.
Staying right.
What we are seeing now is very real cases where the more fingers you give these things, the more trouble
Absolutely.
they get into. The other thing is when you do agents, people are doing longer running workflows, which
Mm.
means you start to get new vulnerabilities where people can, you know, you can drop these very hard to see seeds into the memory of the agent, which you plant
Mm.
multiple seeds over time after it's executing on a problem for hours and you run into
It compounds. Yeah.
things. Um, you get these, sort of compounded hallucination
Yeah.
reliability problems where it's like, hey, I got this thing to 99% reliability. I feel
Right.
good about that. But if you've got 1,000 agents that are involved in some task, each at 99% reliability,
Yeah.
reliability is zero.
Zero. That's true. That's true. So we are actually working with one of the largest tech company, and they are trying to orchestrate an agent, multi-agent. So they have an orchestra agent, and they have the individual agents. They have broken the agents, interestingly enough, to very specific tasks so that I can tighten it, control it. But the problem they have is once I start layering it, the different agents. So the way they are thinking is, hey, each layer is adding a layer of interpretation. Earlier, I used to extract. And the data will go through layers, but it is only summarization or joins.
Mhm.
I had a pipeline. The data quality governance was in place, so I can see how the data gets summarized at the end because it was very predictable, right? I can look at the SQL, I look at the ETL, I know what happened. Here, it is opaque and the layers and layers of just interpretation of the data. So that adds the complexity. Now, when the results come out after this orchestration, very hard for me to understand what was the source, right? And the reliability of it, the relevance, people weed it out. The reliability of it, right? Was it real or is it just based on a fact? Then the risk of what data is getting exposed when the multiple layers and there's a multiple data source at the end, the users who are asking the question, the answer they are getting, are they allowed to see it? Because so many people, so many agents, so many data sources are involved, can they see the answers they generated, right? So
Mhm.
that's where Protecto comes in. We are helping them to fix the data problem there, the data protection problem there, but the hallucination problem is still there. I mean, they're trying different evals to do that, but it's by design, it's very complex. When you add multiple layers of interpretation between the data and the users, and each agent doing its own thing and they interacting, and even you, as you said, that is 99% that 1% compounds, 10, then it comes to 20, 30% decline. Then if you get 1,000, it's zero, right? Pretty
Yeah.
much zero. You cannot expect what you're going to get. So I don't know how that world will be, but at least now it's 5, 10 agents. Let's see how by they're limiting the focus and getting that. So I just want to go to the next we have as a topic was when you fast forward, there is this multi-agent, MCP, A2A, all these new frameworks are coming up. So in this new world, um, still the basics matter, but how should we think about risk, right? How should if somebody design something, or even a tech company is planning for it, or a security companies or cybersecurity startups? Can you give a perspective on that? That'll be very helpful. How this things are evolving.
So I'll start by saying, looking at MCP and A to A, I'm very excited that people are trying to build
Mhm.
these
Mhm.
protocols right now, and,
Right.
and you see the use cases for them that are emerging, and some of the ultimate sort of productivity benefits of those things. They're going to be really powerful. But um, I often tell people, you want to predict the future, go look at the past. And,
Okay. Interesting.
history seems to rhyme and it repeats
Mhm.
itself.
Mhm.
The first version of the OWASP top 10 list, we had a
Mhm.
vulnerability called insecure plugins.
Okay.
And one of the reasons, and it was probably the last thing that got added to the list. It wasn't number
Mhm.
10. It actually
Mhm.
kind of moved up to the middle of the list, but it was the last
Mhm.
thing we added because late in the development of the list, OpenAI shipped their plugin interface.
Right. Right. Right.
And it immediately blew up from a security perspective.
Mhm.
Everybody looked at it and went, this is shockingly insecure. They created this
Right.
marketplace of them, and the marketplace instantly got full of nefarious
The
crap that
customs you
was
did.
stealing people's
Yeah.
data. And so by the time we rebbed the list, we said, well, I'm taking the plugin thing out because the plugin universe had died.
Mm, mm, mm.
So it's like that's no longer the risk. We'll just fold it into excessive agency and call
Mm,
it.
okay. Mm,
Um, Now, of course, as soon as you do that, somebody ships MCP and it
right.
goes crazy. Uh,
Right.
I think when you look at this out there, MCP is really interesting because in the last few weeks, like a lot of people, I tried to build my first things with it.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was really frustrating me at first because I couldn't
Mm,
get it to do what I wanted.
mm,
That's because I didn't realize what it was.
mhm.
Um, Ultimately, uh, MCP and A to A are completely different
Yeah.
things for
Right.
different use cases. And kind of what
Right.
I wanted to build was A to something with A to A that I was trying to
Yeah.
build with MCP.
MCP. Okay.
But if you look at MCP, people are using it for some very ambitious things, but look at what it started at. It
Hmm.
was simply a plugin architecture for the Claude desktop application. That's it. That's what it started
Mm,
as. And it was a
mm.
way to take things and plug them in so that the Claude desktop
The
app could
stock can
access local resources
local.
on your laptop.
Mm.
And that's a very constrained use case. And so,
Case. Yeah.
hey, if I want Claude to be able to go over here and copy a directory for me,
Yeah.
I need to give it some fingers on my
Yeah.
laptop. And so
Right.
the whole protocol is just kind of like standard IO. I mean, it's like
Mm,
a
mm, mm.
most this is not some super advanced network
Yeah.
protocol. And so
Right.
honestly, the security community is kind of looking at it in horror. Uh,
Mm.
I think they're being dismissive for a lot of reasons that the security community generally gets on their high horse about things and likes to make fun of things, and that's not productive. But
Mm.
but when we look at that and we say, okay, I'm going to start to use it and create again giant marketplaces full of MCP things with no regulation on them,
Yeah.
and the protocol itself is not really secure. You're sort of depending
Mm.
on people selecting good things from good places and doing good things with them. There's there's
Yeah.
disasters coming there. And
Yeah, so in some ways I would think is in an open web where the data is all public, you know, no, not a big problem. You can fetch some data from a server. A client can fetch it. Real time dynamically go search for data because it's already public. You're just structuring it in a way it is can be easily communicated with agents and applications. But moment you put that behind an enterprise or you add enterprise data to it, which is not supposed to be open and it has to be controlled and who based on who's accessing it and what purpose it's getting used, then this whole MCP has to be think very differently, because that control is not there, right? Today it's for open web is what I think about it. Simple mind,
yeah,
simple framework for
but
me.
I think when you look at what a lot of these MCP plugins are,
Mhm.
there's no web component to them People are
Mm.
running MCP servers. That's what I was looking for, is like, where are all the MCP servers that I can talk to?
Right. Mm.
They're mostly GitHub repos that you bring down and compile and run
Mm.
on your computer. And what that means is, just for starters, first think about the supply chain of, I'm grabbing a bunch of open source code and I'm
Right.
bringing it down
That's how
and
to
I'm
do
putting it
that.
on a
Yeah.
machine, which is, potentially inside my boundary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm going to give it permissions,
The
RM-RF my laptop.
Right, right. So that's the till you give fingers giving is one, giving an outlet to talk to somebody, and that's
Mhm.
another one. So now you're adding multiple levels of risk to it, and yeah, so that level of that security layer or the thought process not there yet. Hopefully, those things will start built into it because it does simplify, right? It does simplify how an agent talks to data, or agent talks to a tool or API. It does simplify, right? But the security
The,
layer is the hard part.
the thing I'll say, like, to turn it around and talk about the great hope for something like this,
Yeah, yeah,
look at the big security topic for AI right now is vibe coding.
yeah, right, right,
And, everybody's realized, hey, you can be a developer too. And so
right,
there's a lot of drama on the internet about this in
right,
terms of the security implications
right.
of this. But what I'm seeing now is a lot of the security tooling vendors. The challenge for AppSec has always been, how do I really get this stuff into the pipeline in a way that the developers will use it and accept it?
Mm,
Boy, I haven't done it myself yet, but I've seen demos of people who've taken the AppSec tools and built versions of them as MCP servers. And so when you're coding
Interesting.
in something like Cursor, see, that's the
Uh-huh.
thing, is it's MCP is getting used by, let's call them, less traditional clients, which I think is where it gets very interesting, is something like Cursor having MCP support.
Mm,
You can basically tell Cursor, like, okay, I'm asking you to build this app, but
mm,
the sort of system prompt behind it that you're giving it is, but every major change you make, I want you to run it through SemGrep, take the results. If there are any new findings, I want you to fix them before you even get done running this iteration of the code.
Interesting.
I think that's going to take us a while to get right, but it's
But
actually
this
the
actually,
first
yeah.
hopeful thing I've seen, that maybe we could
Right.
actually get the AppSec
The way
tool
you are
into the
chaining, right?
development process. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's some of the steps you would do for app security it's built into the whole process itself because it's smart, right? It can fix
Yeah.
it also, right? So
And
that's interesting. Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that goes for kind of any kind of cyber things that you're doing, is I
right,
think so much of the cyber workflows are limited by the brain power and the finger power of the people in the SOC or things like
right.
that. And as we accelerate all that, and we do find ways to give some good fingers to these things, we could actually do a lot more
More.
cybersecurity than we do.
Yeah, yeah. AI on cybersecurity. That totally makes sense. Yeah, we didn't cover that topic at all. For another topic, we'll just go deeper into applying AI into cybersecurity itself. So let's just double click on in your example where you're trying to do A2A. What was your experience in that? You said you tried to use MCP. Love to know what were you trying to build that. That looks interesting. That's the reason I go there.
Yeah, so I think first off, I didn't actually get to building something with A to A yet.
Uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
wound up having to sort of redivert my efforts on MCP and find some other things to build, and
Yeah.
that was a cool experience to where I think I now understand that.
Okay.
What I'll say is, though, conceptually A to A, the
Mhm.
way I think about that, people talk about MCP as the USB for um,
True.
for tooling, right? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
I plug
Yeah.
this socket in
Yeah.
here? In a lot of ways, the cyber implications are the same, right? It's this very local kind of thing, and so the cyber implications of USB, it was like, oh God, somebody could just plug a USB
Plug
drive
it in and
in
take
there,
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we've kind of all gotten to the point where we just know that that's a risk, and we found ways to deal with it. Um, A to A, though, conceptually, it's the rest for agents.
Hmm.
Well, MCP is USB, this is REST. REST was the point before there was
Right.
when I wanted services to talk to each other or I wanted a client to talk to a server, it was always I'm custom developing a protocol to do this in every circumstances and everybody's APIs and everybody's protocol is unique. Um,
Right.
from a development point of view, that's super pain in the neck. From a
Right.
security point of view, that's also a super pain in the neck. If everybody's got
Mm.
their own protocol and their own encryption, how do you possibly
Right.
build tooling and guidelines to make sense of that? So the fact
Right.
that we developed REST meant
Mm.
that you could have things like an OWASP top 10 for APIs because there was kind
Right.
of a standard for how you built APIs. So I think what A to A, I don't know whether that one really becomes the thing. It's like a few weeks
Mm.
old, it's got some
Yeah.
bugs. But
Yeah.
conceptually, what there needs to be is a standard for how one agent talks to another agent across a network, where
Right.
MCP isn't really a network protocol,
Network.
more
Yes.
like USB. This is
Yeah.
the network protocol for how these things collaborate. And, most of the multi-agent workflows right now
Mm.
are
Mm.
agent one that I own and agent two that I own, and they're going to talk to
Exactly.
each
Within
other.
the, yeah,
Um,
within my, yeah.
the promise of this, though, is
Mm.
that my my SaaS application, the way today
Mm.
it exposes an API through REST, it may expose multiple agent
Just
protocols
to,
that are sort of optimized for rather than for, sort of an app to talk to me like I'm a database and say, hey, I want,
mm.
row this through row that, execute this command. These agents may interact with each other in ways that are more agent native and lead
Yeah.
to more productive, reliable, and ultimately more secure workflows for things like that. I
Yeah. Makes
personally
sense.
don't know about A to A yet, though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What?
So
No.
the examples we have seen so far, right? The customers are all within the customer environment, right? The one I was explaining about, they're building an orchestrator agent and some small agents. Still, we are talking within their prem, within their VPC.
Yeah.
They are not trying to go beyond, like, collaborate outside. That would be a very interesting world where you like what you said, like a REST API. I don't know. I just know the interface. I'll hit it, right, and I'll
Mhm.
collaborate and across different tools. That'll unlock a lot of potential, but we are not there
Yeah.
yet.
But I think
Yeah,
even when you're in the same VPC, right, at some
right,
point, microservices became
right.
possible because there was REST, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I
No,
agree.
so even that local agent to agent thing should have a
Good.
well-managed protocol for it. I think people are looking at A to A as sort of a first iteration of that,
Then
and
yeah,
it's from a,
makes sense.
a smart group. So we'll have to see how it evolves. Conceptually, I'm excited by it, but when you wear your security hat and look at it that way, it's like when
Yeah,
I started to open up the web to APIs and protocols, that created a whole new discipline for how do I secure APIs. You can see
absolutely.
that coming for the agent piece.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So the same evolution likely will happen. The web evolution will happen here, and all the protocols will get standardized. And we are in the early innings of this whole thing. So this is fantastic, Steve. This we have a couple of more minutes. Just with the closing, it has been a good 45 minutes. We covered most of the topics, starting from your start of this top 10 and where is it going. Any parting closing thoughts you have, love to hear it. That's I'll stop there.
Well, the thing I often say to people after a session like this, where we've all
Yeah,
gotten fired up and we've talked about all the security risks and how unmanaged and how
right.
ultimately scary this is it all doesn't matter.
Yeah,
You have to go do this.
do
The
it.
the worst
Exactly.
thing that you can do for yourself or your organization is go, well, this is obviously a security dumpster fire. I'm going to steer clear of it. It's it's the equivalent of saying, this World Wide Web thing doesn't look secure. I'm gonna keep taking my
Agree.
money in my cash register in my store, in which case
Right.
you're gonna be Blockbuster, you're gonna be
Yeah,
Sears
I
Roebuck.
agree.
You need to go do this, otherwise you're
Yeah,
going to get left in the dust.
yeah,
What you want to do is you want to be informed about the risks. You want to lean in to mitigating those risks,
yeah,
uh, and ultimately be out, at the vanguard of this, leading it. and positioning your organization to reap all the benefits of this. Because we're already seeing this where the companies that are really becoming AI native are getting completely unfair
Absolutely.
advantages in the market. So you have to
Absolutely.
do it, but be conscious of it and understand the security risks and figure out how to arm yourself for them.
Absolutely. This is a very important point, Steve. Glad you mentioned this because what we are discussing is not saying that, hey, risk, don't do it. Hey, you have to do it, right? AI is the future. Bet on it, right? Uh, how well to secure it, right? Take you are getting the great powers, but how do you build controls on it? How do you build the basic framework to think about risk? Basic framework to think about data risk. How do data leak? How to protect the data? How do you make sure it is controlled, it is guardrails are in place, things like those, right? But we are not saying that AI is risky, don't adopt. So, people, listeners, this is something very important. AI is the future. We have to adopt it, and it has immense potential. These risks, don't think of it as blockers. Think of the way to think about it, overcome it, and adopt AI safely. With that, I really thank you, Steve. This is fantastic. Love to do it another time. We'll talk about a little bit more about the topics we didn't talk about, which is the AI for cybersecurity type of topics. Love to have you as a guest again.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, listeners. It has been a fantastic session with Steve.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.